Shoo! I'm glad I.
It's weird that you can't get me out of the stage like that.
Yeah. That's right. We'll just keep you there, and you'll be my
I'll just
my guest
I'll
manager.
just go mute now. So
You're my Jamie.
yeah.
All right, everybody. I'm Daniel, in case you didn't know, and we are live on YouTube. So thanks for joining us, and we will be back here in 5 minutes, and just give everybody a minute to drop in. Hey guys, it's Daniel. We are going to kick off here just in a few minutes, letting a few more people drop in. If you are not familiar, we will be receiving all of your questions via the chat option here on YouTube. And so feel free to drop those in and we'll take them as we see them. Looking forward to answering as many questions as we possibly can. See you guys in just a minute. All right. Can everybody hear me? Chris, can we get a thumbs up? Chris Keeley, can we get a thumbs up? All right. Well, we are going to take off.
You're good on audio, Daniel. I'm sorry.
We've got him. No, that's good. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Thanks to fellow board member Chris Keeley, who is going to be my Jamie. I hope a few of you know who that is. And he's going to be operating some of the presentation. So big shout out to Chris for helping out. My name is Daniel Ritz, and I'm going to be making a presentation that we're calling Western Native Trout in Western Public Waters tonight. So thank you for joining us for the Ted Trueblood chapter of Trout Unlimited November membership meeting. So appreciate each and every one of you for joining us. We're going to let a few more people drop in before we get into the presentation. So we're going to have a few just bookkeeping items to get us started. A big thank you to just days after our last presentation, virtual presentation with Eric Moncada on Alpine Lakes. Fantastic. And thanks to Eric, in case you're out there watching. We had a great yard sale thanks to our board members, quite a few volunteers, and of course the fine folks at Idaho Anglers up there on Vista. Moved a lot of great gear to beginners and experts alike, honestly. So it was a lot of fun to set up. It was a chilly morning, one of the first crisp mornings we had. Moved a lot of great gear and made a lot of people really happy, and really appreciate all the hard work of everybody that went into that. So big shout out again, especially the Idaho Angler. On January 7th, you will be seeing the Ted Trueblood chapter of Trout Unlimited at the Boise Valley Fly Fishers Western Idaho Fly Fishing Expo. Really looking forward to that, a return to in-person events. Of course, we want to be safe and we want to be responsible, but we are looking forward to getting back out there into the community and seeing our conservation partners. Also wanted to make a note again on the local chapter level, a few board members, including Blake Schnevely, Andy Brunel, and Chris, we were able to do some more conservation work and restoration work on the Warm Springs Creek over in eastern Boise. 34 ninth grade students were able to go out there from Riverstone High School, and I'm assuming that's high school, I'm sorry. And they were able to learn basically the basics of ecology and conservation while working on restoration of a small side stream to the Boise River right here in town. There is still some work to be done, but we are looking forward to an increased slope and a healthy side tributary to hopefully increase spawning of wild trout, which is of course a stalwart initiative of Trout Unlimited. So we appreciate all the hard work that went into that, to each and every one of those volunteers and our board members that assisted them. On the national level from Trout Unlimited, just a couple of quick notes. Bristol Bay in Alaska has taken a major step towards permanent protections, which has been a long time goal. And we're really, really proud of the work that the folks up there in Alaska have been doing that. If any of you have gotten a chance to go up and enjoy the salmon and the trout fishing in Bristol Bay, we are a real step closer into making that permanently protected from what is really a wrong place, wrong time mining operation. Trout Unlimited has been paving down the road of what we're calling a priority water system. And we're really looking at highlighting priority waters that either due to opportunity or environmental factors and timeliness that Trout Unlimited has identified as the most crucial waters to put our conservation efforts into. There's a great article up on that right now on tu.org. You're going to see this applied locally on a national level. We think it's a really exciting program, and we hope that each of you enjoy and are able to take something away from that. Lastly, this is a season where a lot of us would be either getting into or either ending or beginning our steelhead excursions around the Northwest. And there's a lot of really exciting news that while it's not necessarily coming out of Boise, it relates explicitly to Idaho. And that's to our neighbors to the west and north in Washington and Oregon, who have taken up a really new and exciting chapter through some changes and ongoing litigation, as well as just some new proposals regarding the potential breaching of the Snake River dams and the hopeful return of the incredible and resilient species of salmon and steelhead that return to the Northwest. So if you wanted to check that out, I'd suggest it's tu.org, and that's / just one word, lower snake. So definitely check that out if you're not familiar, because there's a lot of exciting news going on. So we'd really appreciate you guys checking that out. And with that, if we don't have any explicit questions, we'll give it a minute on our local and/or national topics. We'll move into our tonight's presentation. So we'll just give that 1 second, and I'll adjust our screens here. And I'm going to make myself even smaller. There we go. All right. Don't see anything coming through, so let's get started. So what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight, Western Native Trout on Western Public Lands, is my recent 6-month excursion, writing a 40-part series for Trout Unlimited and a series of other partners that we will go through in more detail, where I experienced the 20 available native trout of the 12 Westerns. Again, this really started in earnest in last December, I suppose. It was finalized in February and really hit the road full-time in April, and just finished a few weeks ago. Again, my name is Daniel Ritz. I'm a board member for the Ted Trueblood chapter of Trout Unlimited. It's a lot of T's. Based here in Boise, Idaho, where I work as a communications coordinator. And yeah, so we'll just lean right into it and start it off. Chris, can I get that next slide, please? Just a little bit about me, because there's a lot of people, I'm sure, that are asking who I am and why I'm anything important. And the answer is that I'm not. This is a very everyman's excursion. And the idea is that we wanted this to be relatable to all of the enthusiasts and the anglers that have introduced me into this wonderful, wonderful world of native species. I'm 33 years old. Again, I'm based out of southwestern Idaho. I'm a former newspaper editor, reporter, just a writer by trade, academically trained, and just an enthusiast for fly fishing. Not professionally, I'm not a guide or anything of the sort. I could probably use quite a bit of guidance. And the idea is that this is really just an excursion to dive into and to learn more about the native trout experience that is so iconic and well known across the world. And it's right here in my backyard, and I wanted to learn more about it. And the series to follow is basically a vicarious experience of my own travels and my own learning experience. Chris, can I get that next slide? So, good question is, what is the Western Native Trout Challenge? The Western Native Trout Challenge is essentially a framework that is hosted by the Western Native Trout Initiative. And the idea is that it is a framework where anglers are provided a platform to achieve various levels of, depending on the depth of experience that they desire, to experience each of the native trout in their native habitats. And it basically provides you, a few rules and some guidance, and also quite more resources that we'll share later that a lot of anglers don't know exist, that really guide you into a very dense contextual angling experience that really changes what happens to you when you go fishing as to what do you want to make happen. And it's a really dense experience that I got a lot out of. Chris, can I get the next slide? Quickly, one thing I didn't mention is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to breeze through this, really showcasing the breadth of the experience. And then if you have questions, I would really like the audience to pitch in questions into the chat feature to where we want more depth. I could speak for eons about this. Anybody that's ever known anyone to write a book, they can talk about it forever. But I would love to dive into the subjects that you are more interested in. So don't hesitate to ask questions in that chat. As I mentioned, the Western Native Trout Challenge is a framework where there are various levels of achievement for catching certain numbers of species in certain geographic areas, all of which are included in their native drainage habitats. I personally am not much of a numbers person. I'm not concerned with how many or exactly how big the fish was, and nor was my focus for this excursion really achieving any one set of data points like the expert caster or being called a master caster. I am nothing close to a master caster, but the idea is that, again, this provides you a little bit of a system to work through, and I'll show you how that my kind of program that I went through over the summer works back into what was technically achieving that master caster level, and that is 18 of the available 20 native species of trout and char, salmonids of all of the Western 12 states. So this is a screenshot from the Western Native Trout Challenge website, which I highly suggest anybody go to, even if you're not interested in participating, just to learn more about what's out there. So Chris, next slide, please. So we're going to start at the beginning, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the gear or the what flies did you use and all those really common questions that we love to ask one another. But starting with the planning, if I'm looking at experiencing and catching all of the native species of the West in their native habitats, that's quite a bit of research. And really where I would suggest starting your planning is to work with your regulations and your seasonal fishing restrictions to kind of eliminate all of the total non-possibilities. You do not want to go to New Mexico, likely in August. Gila trout will be very difficult as the water will be very low and it will be very hot. It will be very hot. And there is a certain conservation ethic that goes throughout the entirety of this program. And so we want to make sure that we're doing it responsibly and ethically, as well as that we're not spending lots of valuable time and money on your resources to go somewhere to have a really difficult time to encounter a species. That engagement is a really powerful tool for conservation. We want to make sure that everybody has a great time. How to research that? You are contacting, or I would suggest contacting and reaching out and researching through the local and or regional Trout Unlimited chapters. State agencies, local biologists, regional biologists for your state agencies, and fishing clubs are a fantastic way to reach out. And I reached out to quite a few of the different fishing clubs, especially in places like California, as well as the western states of Montana, just to get some more of that on the ground experience. And meeting a few of those folks was a really, really great way to spend some time out on the road. And I think everyone would be really impressed with the kindness of strangers, as I think John Gierak wrote. That was a title of one of his many fine books. In terms of flies and gear, I would be willing to say that you could do most all of these species with a wide variety of easily accessible gear. My personal focus would be on your searching kind of patterns and that standard 9-foot 5 weight, making sure you're covering as much ground as possible. I would suggest spending more time instead of practice fishing to go hiking or to spend some time in the gym. You're looking at generalist patterns, and the more difficult aspect is to find the fish. It may or may not be difficult to catch them when you get there, but you do have to find them. So that in terms of preparation, I don't find the skill to be off-putting, as anyone who's fished with me can testify to. But you would want to make sure that you have a good range of a diverse range of those, to make sure you can find the fish. Even if it's not perfect, you want to make sure you find them to get that confidence going. Chris, next slide. So looking at the timeline of my trip, again, we started in early May. Late April, early May. And we had certain sections, so this wasn't nonstop, but I wanted to break it down this way to show people that may be interested in partaking in their own Western Native Trout Challenge journey, that you can break it down if you wanted to do just the Southwest or just the Northern Rockies and the Mountain West, that there are certain chunks that you can do to experience a wonderful species and a great angling experience, depending on your time, finances, experience, whatever you would like. So for me, I broke it down into a few that I described here. So my southern journey, which was Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona for respectively Lahontan cutthroat, Gila trout. So that New Mexico portion is for Gila trout in the Southwest, and then Apache trout in Arizona. I then went directly up to Alaska, where I fished for coastal cutthroat in Juneau, and lake trout and Arctic grayling up north in Fairbanks. Came down through South Central and then on the Kenai. What I called the eastern leg, where I did Wyoming, where I completed the Wyoming cut slam, Utah, where I completed the Utah cutthroat slam, Colorado, New Mexico, this time in New Mexico for Rio Grande cutthroat, and then crossed over west to California, up to Oregon, Washington, and then what I called the north, which is back home here in Idaho and Montana. So that was the legs of the trip and the way that I broke it up. And as you could probably imagine, there's any one system that you could work through to experience quite a few different species across a diverse range of terrain, excuse me. Chris, next slide, please. Actually, can you please go back one slide? I'm sorry. I want to make sure that and forgive me, back now 2 slides, not forward. Thank you very much. So this is a photo from Idaho. So this is far southeast Idaho, outside of Bear Lake. That was the only person I saw that day while fishing for the relatively rare Bonneville cutthroat trout of Idaho. So thank you, Chris. Next slide. This is a map of what that excursion looked like when you put it all into one direct line. And again, I did not do these all consecutively as the line may suggest, but this map is available on tu.org. I have an author page there that you can look up. And with this map, what it indicates, and it shows the occurrences, and the dots with the numbers indicate the numerical order in which I would experience each of these fish. So if you see the numbers in the 50s, that was the 50th native species that I would experience in order. There were a few that I was not able to pursue. For example, a few of the rainbow lineage, heritage subspecies up in Northern California, where it was simply too hot while I was there. It was ethically irresponsible to do that when I was there in July, so I would have to surpass those. So I did not achieve all of those, but all of the species are in there. So we can go next slide, Chris. This brings us to the first of the native trout that I experienced, which this was very early May. This photo, which I call Camp Lahontan, is high in the Independent Mountains of northeast Nevada, where I went down and was in pursuit of the stream form of Lahontan cutthroat trout. So that is my camp. I went down there, nearly getting the truck. Well, I did get the truck stuck once, nearly not getting out more than once. In the runoff and snow melt of early May in the high mountains of northern Nevada. Next slide. Here you can see, and I have to apologize, please ignore the photo to the right, but on the left you will see the native range and drainages of the Lahontan cutthroat trout, which do cross over into Idaho, as well as portions of California and southeastern Oregon. This map, which is similar to one that can be found on the Western Native Trout Challenge.org, is an explicit map showcasing the native drainages that are historically relevant to the species upon white settler arrival from east to west in North America. So that's the setting that the categorization of native takes place. I'm not going to misquote the year, but during the 19th century, upon the arrival of white Europeans, what were the species that were found and what were their habitats at the time. And you can see on these maps, which I highly encourage you to check out, the different colorations of, like, for example, orange or purple showcase their historic presence and their current. So I won't repeat that, but you'll see that pattern on a variety of these maps as we go. Next slide, please. Obviously Pyramid Lake, where I did experience my first Lahontan cutthroat trout. This is glass off at Pyramid Lake with a gentleman looking like he's enjoying himself with a pretty deep bend in the rod there. So next slide, please. Now on the left is one of the Lahontans, the Summit Lake strain that we encountered at Pyramid Lake. And then on the right is the exact same Lahontan cutthroat trout, but that is the stream form. So that is a non-original, uninterrupted by hatchery influence, Lahontan cutthroat trout from the high mountains of the Independence Mountains. So Lahontan cutthroat trout, Pyramid Lake, it was an incredible experience, but it is not the entire story of the existence of Lahontan. So I would highly encourage you to experience both. The next slide, please. So this takes us to the Gila National Forest in New Mexico, where here we are looking at the scorched earth that I arrived at after an 18-hour drive south from Boise, which is a humbling sight to see when you're going on a fishing trip. Next slide, please. Here is that same map showcasing the Gila trout, and overlapping to the left, you'll see actually the Apache trout home range there in Arizona in the White Mountains. And we'll get to that in a second, but next slide. Gila trout, which you see pictured, a juvenile Gila trout in my hand there. This is in Mineral Creek in the Gila National Forest, outside of the Gila National Wilderness. The Gila trout was originally home to only one of 3 rivers out of the Gila River drainage in New Mexico. I'm sorry, that's in New Mexico exclusively. And you can see the scorched earth experience and the storyline that I would encourage you to read, and the story that I wrote for Gila trout, showcasing their just absolutely incredible, the toughness of Gila trout and their recovery multiple times from the largest wildfires in the history of the state of New Mexico, and their perseverance. Thank you. What I was looking for. I would really encourage, if you have not made it down there to the Gila country and experienced Gila trout, they are a treasure. They are the southernmost trout found in North America, and it was just an absolute treasure to get out there. And that's Toner Mitchell of Trout Unlimited, of the Water and Habitat Program, pictured there as we walked through the scorched earth post wildfire that we were lucky enough to find some Gila trout in. So next slide, please. Moving over west into Arizona, where I went directly after my Gila experience, into the White Mountains, where I experienced Apache trout. Apache trout are one of the rarest trout in the world, and this is the West Fork of the Black River, I believe, off memory. Just a beautiful meandering stream that's coming out of the Apache Indian Reservation directly upstream from where this picture was taken. Next slide, please. Similar map showcasing their range. Actually, I believe it's the same exact map, but you'll see that high density of that orange. Their Apache trout are native to a very, very small region, which, while it's not the most commonly traveled portion of Arizona, I would guess to say, I would highly encourage anyone that hasn't been there to go out there. It's beautiful, high alpine terrain and lots of great hiking, beautiful fishing. Apache trout can be very difficult to find, but it was a very fulfilling experience, as they are one of the rarest wild trout in the world remaining. Next slide, please. Here's a photo of those said Apache trout, which are iconic for, if you look closely at the eye, you see that it has that black barbell that goes through. They have the all-over spotting, which some trout do have that similar phenotype with the all-over body spotting, but that dumbbell eye feature is unique and iconic to the Apache trout, and those are both unhatchery tainted, 100% wild strain of Apache trout. So I would, again, could not encourage. I believe both of these were taken from the Little Colorado River, which, again, we are not spot dropping any of these places. This is widely available, and as these are very, very close to were formerly endangered, and they are actually rapidly growing in population. So we're really happy and really thankful to the work being done by the Arizona agency. Next slide, please. So we have now gone back from Arizona up to Boise, hopped on a plane, and this is in southeast Alaska. This is in the Tongass National Forest. Pictured there is Mark Hieronymus, who is the sport fishing coordinator for Trout Unlimited in Alaska. And we are on the hunt here for, fresh from the sea Dolly Varden. Next slide, please. So you'll see here, this is pictured inside of the the blue framed zone you can see on the southeast, basically excluding only the Yukon area of the interior of Alaska there, is the home native range of Dolly Varden. Next slide, please. Here you can see kind of a fun picture. We were standing on the beach and we were casting streamers to the Dolly Varden that were cruising the coastline there in the Tongass National Forest. And you can see the bait fish, the smolt of the salmon that were being essentially pushed out of the inner river. And there's the fly that we were casting made by Mark Hieronymus underneath it, and a fresh out of the salt water. You can see how chromed out they are. Dolly Varden there in my hand back on the beach. So next slide, please. Flying from southeast up to Fairbanks, where I met Oliver Ankans, who is the president of the Trout Unlimited, the Fairbanks chapter of Trout Unlimited. We are fishing here for Arctic grayling outside of Delta. The nature of Fairbanks is I have never experienced something so vast in all of my travel experience international. And the river systems outside of Delta and south of Fairbanks as you're heading into the Alaska range are just breathtakingly beautiful. And there's a variety of springs actually that while you're in permafrost, where the ground actually never actually thaws at all throughout the entire year, and subterranean, some of these rivers don't ever freeze over due to the warm water springs that come through. So there is fantastic fishing for a few of these species. Next slide, please. We were pursuing grayling here, and you can see the outline of their home range. Grayling have one of the largest home and native ranges in Alaska. Obviously in Alaska, where you see a mostly uninterrupted trout program, you're not going to see as many of the issues of invasive species, while there are like pike and things like that. Most of the native species are widely prevalent and much less threatened than you see in the lower 48. And you can see that showcased by the range of the Arctic grayling, which, while it's not a trout or technically a char either, it is a salmonid and part of that same salmonid family. And the Arctic chars are recognized as one of the native species in the Western Native Trout Challenge. I believe there's 5 or 6 different subspecies varieties of grayling, but we'll let anybody that wants to go to Europe or Russia be concerned with that. Next slide, please. This was my pride and joy Arctic grayling. You can see the beautiful colors there with the iconic fan. Thanks to Gabby Mordini for this photo. You can, we're now into the middle of June, you can see that there's snow in the exteriors as we're just maybe an hour outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. Next slide. But there's quite a bit more snow where we went next, where we traveled further down the Richardson Highway into the Alaska range, where we were in pursuit of lake trout. And as you can see, time of year, we were purposefully attempting to time the ice out for our pursuit of lake trout, where and that's Oliver Ankans that I mentioned earlier, pictured in the photo, where we were standing on the shore, where there's underneath the surface of the water, maybe 8 inches underneath the surface, there's a shelf of ice that goes out maybe 10 feet, and you're standing on that, casting streamers and sinking lines out to the ice shelf that you can see, which is maybe 50 to 60 feet out, and letting that streamer sink before ripping it out, where those carnivorous lake trout are looking for all the bait fish that are mostly whitefish, I believe, that are in the shallows attempting to warm up, while seasonally they're still very much warming up. So it was very timely, and we were very lucky. Next slide. This is that range, which again encompasses most of the north into the interior of Alaska. Next slide, please. This is my first lake trout caught in. As you can see, there is the sliding ice in the background, and it's hailing in this photo, which was alternating between snow and hail and ice and rain, seemingly 4 seasons in any one day. But this was my first lake trout, which we managed to actually get very lucky on a couple of points of this to be unnamed lake that I was lucky enough to go with. And lake trout are just fascinating. They're beautiful fish, and the way that they attack, there's freight trains when they hit these flies, and we're casting good size 5-6 inch flies with, again, sinking lines, rapidly stripping them out. And these lake trout, they don't really run at all when you catch one. They bulldog like nothing I've ever experienced, and it's almost like they're just backing out. It was a radical experience, and in a world where we're looking for alternatives to responsibly fish for cold water species, if you want an alternative experience, lake trout may be it. I could not suggest it enough. It was challenging, it was fulfilling, and standing there in the snow and in the ice, I had a very surreal moment as I captured my first lake trout, recognizing just how far from home I was, even though I was only a few species into this trip. So next slide, please. Now we are in South Central Alaska, and we are in pursuit of the iconic Alaskan Rainbow trout, which is in fact its own genetic subspecies. It's unique enough, I suppose would be the proper way to say it, unique enough to be identified as its own unique subspecies. However, it is reproductively capable of, crossing with other rainbow trout species, which make it that same species. I'm not a biologist, but just so that everybody understands why I say subspecies or why I don't, or yeah, it is a lake trout, or I'm sorry, it is a rainbow trout, but it is a certain subspecies. Pictured there is Eric Booten, another one of the sport fishing coordinators and outreach coordinators, I believe, for Alaska TU. Eric and I are in hour maybe 8 or 9 of our 14-hour fishing day for Alaska rainbow trout in this picture. So next slide, please. And that's the range. We can pass by these pretty quickly. We can just show these, Chris, these maps. I just want people to know. Here are the Alaska rainbow trout that we were able to capture, just a few of them. And while they were small, they were mighty. These are 100% wild, hatchery untainted, and they fought exactly like so. Next slide, please. This was my first proper failure of the trip. This is the Kenai Wildlife Refuge, the canoe trail there. This is on the northern side of the Kenai Peninsula in, I suppose you would just call it southern Alaska. Forgive me, Alaska, if anyone's up there watching. And next slide. This is where I pursued Arctic char. And Arctic char are found in a very refined area of like pure Arctic char native species. They're commonly overlapped and mistaken for Dolly Varden. And we're not going to get into the intricacies of exactly how they can be crossover, but you can see their native ranges here. And you want to be careful that if you're in pursuit of an Arctic char, that you are in fact in one of their native ranges so that you can be recognized for that. Next slide, please. You can see here a wide variety of fishing tactics that, again, were unsuccessful. It was too warm. They were too deep. I encountered folks that were catching Arctic char with bait and spinning rods, which is fine for them, but I was unable to get them. That's me in a pack raft in the right at probably 11 p.m. And then there's one of the canoes that me and my incredible host, Dave, were attempting to pursue them in that, but we were unsuccessful. So that was the first of my 20 that I was pursuing. So I was down to a total even possible of 19. So next slide, please. We're back on the mainland now, down to, again, a perfect score would have been 19 at this point. So, but in Wyoming, it was important to me to, as it borders my home state of Idaho, to complete what is called the Wyoming Cutthroat Slam, which is where you catch each of the native cutthroat species in Wyoming. These slams are a fantastic way to having an angling experience that really educates you as to the breadth of the environment and the conservation efforts that go into these very specific phenotypes and subspecies of these well-known iconic trout. And it really adds a lot to your travel experience. Pictured is the fine spotted Snake River cutthroat, which is, believe it or not, closer related to the Yellowstone cutthroat than any others. And there's a lot of arguments and whether you're a lumper or a splitter with taxonomy, but that was the first fish that I encountered. That's the Hoback River pictured in the back there. So that is one of the wild and scenic Hoback River. And next slide, please. Chris, great question. I did catch native Alaska rainbow trout while I was unsuccessfully pursuing the Arctic char in those lakes. So caught some beautiful fish, and you always appreciate everyone, and they were in fact native, but we were unable to get the species that we were pursuing. So that's the dangerous game of when you turn something into a challenge like this, but we were out to tell a story, and those things certainly happen. It's a great question. Thank you, Chris. And we can go to the next slide. So here are the remaining 4 cutthroat of my Wyoming cutthroat slam. So pictured is the little known Westslope cutthroat trout that exists only in the far northwest corner of Wyoming. Few people know that the Westslope cutthroat trout was actually the dominant species of the western part of Yellowstone National Park. They're now extraordinarily hard to find. Next to that is the Yellowstone cutthroat, where I fished in the Absaroka Range, and Bonneville cutthroat down at the Tri-Basin Divide, and the Colorado River cutthroat, which I caught down further south in Wyoming on the Utah border in the Red Rock country, which if you have not had an experience, if you have not yet experienced the Red Rock country of southern Wyoming, I believe you should. So whether you choose to take my advice or not, I hope the photos testify. Next slide, please. This is looking at, we're going to start to break down here. If you see these border around this fish species in some of these photos, that's because this was the fish that was technically recognized as my quote unquote counting for the Western Native Trout Challenge for that state. So this is in Sweetwater County. This is that Red Rock country where I encountered the Colorado River cutthroat trout, but in Wyoming. So next slide, please. This is looking at that range of the Colorado River cutthroat that exists there, mostly there in Colorado, but you can see it across the border there into Wyoming as well to the north, and then the Rio Grande of Colorado to the south. Next slide. So looking at a few of the Colorado River cutthroat species that I caught across my travels, and the one in the bottom right there with the small barrier is a Colorado River cutthroat from Hermosa Creek in Colorado. And then there's actually one, the one in the top left picture was a beautiful fish that I had caught in Utah, northern Utah, so a Colorado River cutthroat there as well, counting towards my Utah cutthroat slam, which, next slide. Getting into the Utah cutthroat slam. Now, the Utah cutthroat slam is made up of 4 species, excuse me, and this is the Bear River cutthroat, which is a, believe it or not, while it's closely related to the Bonneville cutthroat trout in terms of geographic area, it's more closely related, most likely they believe, to the Yellowstone cutthroat trout. If you have not had a chance to, if you're a history buff or a geology buff, the division of the cutthroat trout of Utah is fascinating. But this is the pictured in this photo is the Bear River cutthroat trout, which is technically not included in the Western Native Trout Challenge, but I wanted to pursue as a part of the Utah cutthroat slam. Next slide, please. Here are their home ranges, which can be found on the Utah Cutthroat Slam. Has a fantastic website that I would really encourage everyone to go check out. So next slide, please. And here are the remaining 3 species. Top is the Yellowstone cutthroat. Set below that is going to be the, that is going to be the Colorado River cutthroat, I'm sorry. And below the bottom photo there is going to be Bonneville, the state fish of Utah, the Bonneville cutthroat trout. And pictured to the left there is above Flaming Gorge, or that is Flaming Gorge above the dam, which leads in Green River. So beautiful scene. If you have not had a chance to explore the native trout of Utah, the Cutthroat Slam does an absolutely incredible job. And big shout out to one of the pioneers of the Utah Cutthroat Slam program, Brett Prettyman, who acted as my editor and champion and friend, and yeah, as a great friend during this trip. So shout out to you, Brett, and I suggest you put some eyes on his work, because he has really worked hard to put together a fantastic program. Next slide. So we are now down focusing on the highlight species, which is the Bonneville cutthroat trout, and this is in the Cache National Forest in Utah. Next slide. You can see the various ranges of the fish of Utah there, broken down a little bit more. And here we go. Yeah, it was a little tough to see. Thank you, Chris. And here's another example of that beautiful Bonneville cutthroat trout, the famous state fish of Utah, which can also be found in a variety of other states, Nevada and Idaho as well. So next slide, please. So we are now looking at, we are in Colorado, not in pursuit of the Colorado River cutthroat. We are actually in pursuit of the Rio Grande cutthroat trout, which can be found in southern Colorado and New Mexico. This is the San Juan National Forest in Cañejos County. I'm sorry, this is Cañejos County. This is the Cañejos Valley there in southern Colorado, where I joined Jeff Arterburn in pursuit of Rio Grande cutthroat. Next slide. And here's a fantastic map showcasing the original drainages in Colorado and New Mexico of the Rio Grande. Next slide. Here's a few photos of the absolutely beautiful Rio Grande cutthroat trout, taken in various locations in southern Colorado and New Mexico, thanks to the help of more than a few staffers from TU showcasing. And this was actually a sandstorm blowing across the Carson National Forest. This picture was taken right before the sky essentially went dark, and I tried to go to sleep in 60 to 70 mile an hour winds in the middle of that field. So you do want to be prepared, for very serious weather, even in these iconic southwestern states. The storms can be serious, and you want to make sure that you're prepared with a vehicle and equipment, that while it's just a fishing trip, when you're taking something serious under like this, I learned more than a few times that not the hard way. I was careful enough not to learn the proper hard way, but got very close, and you want to pay attention to the elements. So next slide, please. Traveling over to California, and we're going to go through these pretty quickly. My time in California was a bit of a breeze because we worked really hard to make quick work of not too many fish, because it was really hot. As I passed into California, it was 118 degrees, passing over the desert and getting to Central California and the Sequoia National Forest. This is the Kern River, pictured above Kernville, California, where we first set out to pursue Kern River rainbow trout. Next slide. And this is the entirety of the system of the Kern Valley's 3 native trout species: the little Kern Golden, the California golden trout, and the Kern River rainbow trout, all in this one singular drainage. Next slide, please. Here's the Kern River Golden. This is the Kern River rainbow trout, iconic for those. It is a rainbow, but with those white stripes on its fin, or the white ends of its fin there. You can see in that bottom left photo, caught in the Kern River on a sizable stimulator that you can see in that photo. Next slide, please. Here is my pursuit of California golden trout, where even in the heat and at now over 10,000 feet, almost 10,000 feet in the Inyo National Forest, you can see that does not stop the cattle drive. So this was a particularly Western scene, we felt. So thanks to my good friend Steve Merrow for a fantastic photo of the experience of my pursuit of California golden trout. Next slide. We can breeze past this one. Here's the California golden trout, which again is spread all over the West. There's Wyoming and places in Idaho, and one of the most asked about species in my trip. However, very few people know that it is in fact only resident native to the Kern River Valley there in Central California. So it could not suggest enough spending the time to get out and go up high into the Inyo National Forest and spend some time responsibly pursuing one of the most beautiful species in their native habitats that I encountered in this trip. So next slide, please. I was unable to pursue the little Kern River golden trout, and what was a really great, a humbling lesson in the need for conservation and the need for biodiversity, as the little Kern River golden trout only exist in this singular tributary of the main stem Kern River. And so the little Kern River is the only home of this unique species of golden trout. And it actually was closed, and I was unable to access the entirety of the population, as it was in a wildfire in 2020 that encapsulated the entire drainage. So the actual existence of this species is unfortunately unknown at this point. So it's with crossed fingers that we hope that various environmental circumstances will allow them to continue, and that we can do the conservation work to encourage that. So next slide, please. And one more, please. Heading north up the 395 through California, I passed through the Dixie National Forest and the Dixie Fire, and we've now landed in Central Oregon. And so we are in the Deschutes National Forest, and that iconic blue water may be recognizable by some. That is a natural spring-fed river that is home to, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Some of the most beautiful redband trout that I've ever seen. Now, redband trout are resident rainbow trout that are going to be home to the coastal states of places like California, or with tributary accesses like places like Idaho, where we have the snake and the salmon that lead through. That photo in the bottom right is actually taken in a tributary of the Salmon River. That is a resident rainbow trout that is non-migratory, and it is not anadromous. It would make it a Columbia Basin lineage rainbow trout, which redband trout, which is a offshoot of what is commonly umbrella described as the rainbow trout. The taxonomy of rainbow trout you can get into the weeds very quickly, but for the sake of understanding, let's call these are native, wild, non-hatchery. These are resident rainbow trout that do not travel to sea. They are generally non-migratory, and they exist in states and waterways with access to the coast. So again, California, Oregon, Washington, you will find them, as well as states like Idaho, any of those tributary states. So next slide, please. So now we move on to what a lot of people consider their favorite. This is a juvenile. One of my favorite bull trout that I caught pretty deep into the Frank Church River Kern Wilderness in Idaho. I had never caught a bull trout before, and they're widely iconic for being one of the most threatened species, as they're highly predatory and they're commonly caught on large streamers. This was a bull trout that I encountered on a very small streamer that you can see. It's kind of fuzzy in the bottom right of the picture. Just a beautiful juvenile specimen in a small stream that just showed that there was an active and vibrant and accessible wild reproducing population, very close to a river system that was rapidly cut off and is potentially going to be reopened for some mining that you can agree or disagree may not be the wisest choice for location because of the role that it could play in the migration of highly migratory and very intensely threatened species like Chinook salmon and bull trout. So Andy, the question coming in, I would love to fly into the Frank, but this one I did on foot. So I drove and I drove and I drove, and then I walked and I walked and I walked. So this was taken this was outside of the wilderness. This was on a stream in the far northern portions of the Payette National Forest. Next slide, please. This is the home range, which you can see the variation between the historical presence and the current presence of bull trout. Bull trout are known for being extraordinarily sensitive to cold water temperatures, and they're also highly migratory. They move a lot. I believe I made a comparison of fishing for bull trout is like shooting a moving target in the dark. So it could be done. And I was glad to finally, after I guess a few years and lots of trips, to finally encounter one. My loving fiance sent me out on the road with the warning of go and do not come back until you get a bull trout. So thank you. Next slide, please. This is a photo of the first bull trout that I proudly caught, and there you can see the iconic white fins, and it has that orange spotting that's iconic for some of the bull trout that you can see. The bull trout is technically a char species. A little fun trick that you may know, but some may not, is that with char species, you'll notice that they have light spots on dark bodies as compared to trout species, which have dark spots on light bodies. So if you think quickly, you can think of a few other commonly called trout species that are actually char. So if anybody, first person to chime into the chat on that can name another one, it's a high five for me the next time you see him. Next slide, please. So we go up to catch coastal cutthroat in the Hood Canal of Washington. Coastal cutthroat were extraordinarily interesting, and I worked with the Coastal Cutthroat Coalition, which is performing a really exciting program with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, where they are taking guides and anglers out to essentially by hook and line catch coastal cutthroat. They are taking the scales to trace the genetics and to track the genetics of these coastal cutthroat, and really testing to see where they are reproducing, where they're traveling from, if they're traveling at all. Because while coastal cutthroat are widely known as the first cutthroat lineage of trout of the native species of the West, due to the prioritization, understandably so in a lot of occasions, of salmon and steelhead, so little is known of coastal cutthroat. And so I fished with James Losey and a captain out of Washington, and we went out and learning from the gentleman at the Coastal Cutthroat Coalition, and James Losey of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, learning how little they knew and how hard they were working. Because with salmon steelhead and the influx of new anglers and the transition of steelhead and salmon folks to coastal cutthroat, there's going to be unprecedented pressure. And next slide, you can see that a lot of the range is going to overlap where those losses in salmon and steelhead are coming from, and they're seeing increased pressures. And to see the work they're putting in to really, for the first time, find out the management fundamentals of the species was fascinating. Next slide, please. And I was proud to catch, they're just so vibrantly colored, and they're so unique as they showcase all four of the life histories of trout: adfluvial, fluvial, resident, and anadromous. They're strangely prehistoric and dinosaur-esque, but also so diverse and so interesting, and so little is known about them. I just thought that was a really fascinating experience. So if you have a chance, Washington, Oregon are not all about salmon and steelhead. While they are great, coastal cutthroat trout are a fantastic experience, and I would encourage you to put a little work and maybe open your wallets to the Coastal Cutthroat Coalition while you're at it. So thank you. Next slide, please. Back into Idaho. So before this all started, folks asked me, and they love the question, what's your favorite cutthroat? What's your favorite trout that you're going to pursue or that you did? It's impossible to answer, but I will say that I guess at the end of the day, if I had to be a cutthroat or had to be a Western native trout, I would be a Westslope cutthroat trout. And it's because of landscapes like this, which are their native habitat. This is the Lahontan River in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness here in Idaho. Iconic native grounds of the Westslope cutthroat trout. Next slide, please. Westslope cutthroat trout have historically had the largest range, and they still do, of all of the Western native trout species and subspecies, largely due to the headwater nature that is protected, headwater nature of their habitat that is largely protected by uninterrupted and undeveloped federal and or protected lands. So there's a large portion of that purple that you can see there that is largely protected by whether it's the Frank Church Wilderness, or the variety of wildernesses that occur in central and northern Idaho and all of the western border of Montana. So next slide, please. These are a few of my favorite shots of a few of the Westslope cutthroat trout that many of us are familiar with here based in Boise. I see a few of the names in the chat and attending. So these were some of the larger specimens. In the Lahontan, there were a wide variety, a large number of fish, and there was a wide variety of sizes and coloring. Westslope are really an endless bounty of experience, and you can cherry pick you can spend a lot of time getting to through the heavy water and fishing for bigger fish. And it was a real practice it was a beautiful thing to experience such a beautiful species with such a range of size and color, but that was pretty widely available, which was a really refreshing experience, especially after some humbling times in California and there in Oregon as well. And which really taught me how difficult it was sometimes to share in the experience of these native species that were once abundant. So next slide. Climbing up over the Lahontan Pass, getting into Montana, where the species that I pursued to count for my Montana species for the Western Native Trout Challenge. So we are at 18 of 19. I'm coming down to the final run. And so we're coming around the bend of the final portion of our trip, and I'm looking at the Yellowstone, and Montana has a unique system for the Western Native Trout Challenge, where in Montana, they have a rule where you cannot essentially pay to enter for a contest or any sort of competition, including native species. So they take you to locations where you have genetically pure native species that are stocked. They are not hatchery, but they are stocked in destinations in their native range, but they are not native to that water system. So alpine lakes or now disconnected river systems that previously were once connected. So it is a unique rule. And Montana still gladly participates in the Western Native Trout Challenge because they see it as an education tool, which I think is extraordinarily valuable, but it is different. Next slide, please. And in Montana, you can see the range. This is the range of the the Yellowstone cutthroat, which you can see overlapping into quite a bit of that north of the Yellowstone range, which is where I chose to pursue mine. Next slide, please. So north of the Yellowstone National Park, the photo on the right is taken from one of the Western Native Trout Challenge stocked locations, a beautiful Yellowstone. And then along the Yellowstone River in a location that I was sworn to secrecy. On the photo on the left is a photo of me returning a probably lifelong trophy Yellowstone cutthroat trout back into the water, looking into the mountain range. Into a small winding, big fish, small stream there in Montana. So really enjoyed my Yellowstone cutthroat experience. I will say that while I love Westslope, the Yellowstone cutthroat are just an iconic Western species that really showcases the Western fly fishing experience. So next slide, please. The last species that we're getting into, I actually had to return. So we're now I'm attempting to do 19 of 19. I'm sorry, I'm attempting to do my 18 of 18 after this would complete my master caster. I returned to Northern California. This is Eagle Lake, which, similar to Pyramid Lake, is a really high alkalinity lake where the Eagle Lake rainbow trout has habituated to, next slide please, has habituated to the water system. These maps, if you can see, there's the large brown. It's a pretty bad job with the square block blocking it. But on the photo on the left, you can see the area within the blue lines. That is the native range of the Eagle Lake Rainbow, which encompasses Eagle Lake itself and the surrounding either currently or once connected tributaries, including a small alpine lake that I fished for Eagle Lake, in addition to Eagle Lake, which you saw in the photo previous. Next slide, please. So Eagle Lake rainbows, it was somewhat fitting to wrap up the trip of all of the exotic species in Alaska with lake trout and the grayling and all, to wrap it up with a rainbow trout. But as you can see, it did not fail to impress as the Eagle Lake rainbow. And I'm not exactly sure why this is, but this incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? The perseverance, again, I've overused that word, the perseverance of this species, looking at wildfire, looking at water shortages, and also the work that has been done by the folks at TU and the California agency. I get them confused. My apologies, but the folks that are working on the conservation of Eagle Lake rainbows, they're really saving what is an incredible subspecies of rainbow. They really are, just like this photo, like it's tough to describe, but it's an almost pastel. It looks almost cartoonish, blue back with these pastel pink sides. And it was like nothing I had ever seen. And out on a float tube in this mid-sized alpine lake to capture that 18th species that brought me to the mastercaster level, and to complete this trip in California with something so unique and unexpected like that was just it was an overwhelming experience. So could not suggest. Most folks I talk to do not know about the Eagle Lake rainbow and that they exist. And I could not suggest the experience enough. So next slide, please. So this is a little bit of by the numbers, and you guys can read all of this. And this will be available here on YouTube for you guys to enjoy if you wanted to at length. I've already been talking for too long, but almost 23,000 miles covered. Roughly 5,000 of it on dirt roads, which we all know how long travel on dirt roads takes, and 5,000 is a lot. 18 of the 20 available species, all 12 states, only one injury, 14-hour longest day, lots of flies decorating the trees. So my apologies for that. It was not intentional. Thank you to Montana Fly Company, who supported a large number of my generic fly choices for this trip. And so I appreciate all of those guys. And next slide, please, Chris. Here's a showcasing of how I broke up my own particular submissions to the Western Native Trout Challenge. And I don't think I did a very good job of introducing this at first, but you pay ahead of time for an entry into the Western Native Trout Challenge as a whole. It's $25 to enter, and your money does go directly to conservation of the native species. The Western Native Trout Challenge funds the Western Native Trout Initiative, which is a habitat partnership of federal agencies, state agencies, and habitat partnerships that support conservation specifically for these native trout. So your money goes directly to conservation. We're all fishermen or habitat supporters of any one sort, I know that everyone in this room has spent $25 on something much less meaningful than contributing to conservation. That's your entry fee. You pay before you do it. They encourage you so that you can work through all of the regulations responsibly and really get a handle of how to responsibly approach all of these species. I broke up I'm going to use the phrase the lowest level. I broke up the 6 species in 4 states that's needed for the expert caster by doing what I call the Mountain West states, my neighboring states of Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and Nevada. So you can see that there. Next slide, please. And then I chose to do my advanced caster. I did each one species for each state. So that's, I believe it's described here. 12 species in 8 states, excuse me. I decided to make it one for each state just to have a good piece for the wall. And next slide, please. And this is that master caster, which this is 18 of the 20 available species, showcasing all 12 states. So we'll proudly hang those from the walls one day. Once work really starts to kick in. Framing is expensive. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, we'll proudly showcase those. And it's about much more than what you get as your tokens for your $25 really contribution to conservation. But it is great to look back and to walk through memory lane as I trace down the stories of all of those species. So next slide, please. This is really a compilation of all of the resources that I used to complete my own trip. So Western Native Trout Initiative, which is the funding partner nonprofit that I've mentioned there at the top. There's the challenge below it, Trout Unlimited, keep the 2 slams of Wyoming and Utah, as well as other states and the agencies that you can find information. So there will be some direct links to that available there. ONX, which was a valuable tool to showcase when I was on public and private land and how to manage walking or driving through those experiences. Make sure that you're following all the laws, because we do want to make sure that native trout and conservation enthusiasts like Trout Unlimited supporters are really being good, upstanding, law-abiding citizens to make sure that we are participating in our conservation in a positive way, so that we can all move down the paths to our collaborative goals together. So ONX is a great tool for that. Appreciate that. Coastal Cutthroat Coalition. You will see the Jack's Experience Trading Company link. That is I'm going to shamelessly self-promote my own website that I have started. That is the home for my own, all of my own personal branding for writing, freelancing. So you can find the entire series that I produced for Trout Unlimited. There are links to all of that on that site if you don't get them through Trout Unlimited. I believe that is the conclusion of the slideshow. So I'm going to turn it now. That's the breadth of the trip. I know I really ran through it. That was a lot, and I appreciate you guys absorbing all of my word vomit. I would love if you guys would open up the floor, if you guys would take off with some questions. I know there's got to be a few questions out there. And again, I apologize if any of this was too brief of coverage for your liking, but I wanted to showcase the wide range and just the terrain and the experiences that can be experienced by participating in something like the Western Native Trout Challenge. So I'm gonna close out of the link here or maybe Chris, can we put on a prettier picture than all of the links? And then we're just gonna hang out for a minute and I will take your questions in the chat. So yeah, hit me. What do we got? Andy, I know you've got another question out there. I've never known you to ask one question. How did you plan for what gear you would need for each trip? So great question. I worried less about fishing gear, honestly, than the surrounding gear that I would need for weather and conditions. But I try to travel pretty light. I use a sling pack, and it was summer, so in terms of you don't want to be carrying around too much. It was hot, but I will what I would really, really like to share is that it's more about the legwork, and it was not about this was not a find the right fly, find the find the right fly, or dig through the case, like, oh, they're taking an 18 and not a 16. Like, I've personally found a lot more pleasure and success in move to the next hole, move to the next move to the next hole, move around the next bend. And I would suggest moving that way. But I tried to use the most middle range equipment that I could. For me, taking that, instead of a Euro rod, I would take a dry fly rod, and I would, work a nymph system off of that. It might not be perfect for it, but I would suggest, using, the most diverse range of equipment that you can. And it's hard to answer. Andy, I can answer any one of these questions on specifics. That one's a tough one with the whole range. I just tried to cover as much ground as I could with as little equipment as I could. Yeah, I guess it would really boil down to trying to focus on searching patterns that are going to kind of generalize as many bugs as you possibly can. You think it's going to be a dry fly day, pack your dry fly box and start picking through. And try to start with ones that you think will move something, even if it's too big or it's too small. I'm sorry if I can't, that's a tough question to like narrow in on a specific answer on. Jill, willing to come present for the, absolutely love Sun Valley, absolutely love Sun Valley. And I would be honored to do that. So it would be really cool to do in person, or we can do a virtual thing. Yeah, we'll catch up. We'll talk after this. We'll make sure that we connect. Kevin McIntyre, this looks great. And how difficult would it be to do this DIY? It seems like you had a lot of great people from TU helping you. Great point. I will say it would have been extraordinarily difficult without a lot of help and a lot of support to do it in a consecutive pattern like I did. It was important to me for the idea of, like, I was writing a series of stories about this. I kind of had deadlines. I was looking to really capture a snapshot of the Western United States and its native species at one time. So in order to do it that way, yes, I absolutely leaned into it. I am intensely grateful to the community of people that supported me through this. That said, I didn't get any handouts from TU. I didn't. I was not. This was not a requirement. There were no job requirements. I was. Nobody got paid to help me. I am not an employee of Trout Unlimited. I am a volunteer. And while I got some introductions, and this was a project that we worked on together, I made the calls to those folks, and there were people from TU. But I think equal to the personal experiences that I gained in talking to people like Toner Mitchell, or wherever it may be with, let's say, fishing with Ty Churchwell down in Colorado. That was a fantastic experience, but that was really providing depth to the stories. Most of the valuable know-how that I got in terms of how to do this trip and achieving the act of catching the fish, I really gained from contacting local agency and like a biologist, regional biologist. I could not encourage you enough, Kevin, those folks are not just there to serve you with regulations. They're not just there to make the rules. That's like the end product of what they do. But reaching out to folks and contacting them, saying like, hey, I'm really interested in learning more about native trout and where the work's being done and what's going on, and I want to experience them responsibly, and sharing that you're a conservationist, and sharing with not just TU staff, but TU chapters. I spoke to so many chapter leaders and state leaders, and they're all volunteers. They don't have to help you, but I was really impressed when they did. And you just, Kevin, pick up the phone, man. Pick up the phone. I'm not a great fly fisherman. I'm a good writer. I'm a pretty good writer. I think I'm trained to be a writer. I'm not a great fisherman. I think that anyone could do this, and a lot of people could do it even easier than I did. I would not suggest to everyone to try to do it in a 6-month period consecutively. That was difficult, and that was challenging. That's where most of it came from. And I'm going to double down, Jane, I'm going to get to your question, but Kevin, to answer yours, once you enter the challenge, you have it could be a lifetime achievement. before you complete any one of those brackets that you would like. Again, I chose to do it in a consecutive for the sake of the storyline and kind of shining a light on the Western Native Trout experience in 2021. I wanted to do it with that sense of pace, but you do not have to. And you could take the rest of your life and submit your master caster application on your deathbed and sign off from there. So sorry, that was unnecessarily morbid, but no, you do not have a time limit. And yeah, it takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of time, but it's all elbow grease, man. I really believe that. It is not extraordinarily like physical or skillfully difficult to get where you need to be. Be in better shape than you think you need to be, though. I'll tell you that. That's the God's honest truth. I hope that answers your question, Kevin. If you have any questions, feel free. Like, you can literally personally contact me. Jane, how much time did you spend fishing for each species? What were the easiest species to catch and what were the hardest? It really differed. It really differed. How much time did you spend for, I'll answer them in order, but I would say if you wanted to travel somewhere to pursue any one of these species, give yourself a couple of days, give yourself a day or two. Some of them you might catch fish in the first you might catch fish the first cast, honestly, if you get to the right place. And that can and did happen. Again, I was under I had this sort of time, I don't want to call it a restraint, but system in place where I was looking at my watch a little bit more. And some of them will happen. Some of these species, if you pay attention to the right time of year and the right places, I would not say that anyone is incapable. There's no physical skill restraints to getting into any of these species. Most of them is finding them, and a lot of that has to do with time of year and the environmental and the habitat that supports them. So I would spend a little bit more time researching to decrease the amount of time you have to find hunting. But what were the easiest, to quickly answer your question? Redband trout, when you find them, they're very eager. Yellowstones, Westslopes, even a lot of your Rocky Mountain cutthroat species are not extraordinarily difficult to catch a fish. It's so easy to spend so much time just enjoying it that I really enjoyed that. What were the hardest? Well, I have to say Arctic char because I didn't get one. Other than that, lake trout can be challenging just because they're very timely sensitive. You have a pretty short window of when you're going to, at least with a fly rod, you can troll and off the back of a boat and things like that. And that's well and good. That's just not the way that I particularly enjoy my fishing experience. But I would say lake trout were difficult to you spend a lot of time. It was mostly time of year. We spent a long day looking for Alaskan rainbow trout, and I did not get a trophy. In Alaska, there's this unspoken rule that you really don't talk about catching an Alaskan rainbow trout unless it's 30 inches. Mine was 12, and I got broken off by a couple of 12-inch fish. Just things are stronger in Alaska. So what were hardest? I really would relate that to any of these fish are very catchable, if that's a word. But it's mostly about finding them. It's the work that you put in, and it's how much stress you want to put yourself under to if you have to have a timeline. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question, Jane. In person, sounds good. I love Sun Valley. We're right down the road, so we'll connect, Joe. Anybody else? It's what do we got here? It's 7:42, so we will close this and we'll wrap it up by 7:45. Just about, if anybody has any questions, drop them in. I would really encourage you to again, I have an author page. If you look up Daniel Ritz, Trout Unlimited, Western Native Trout Challenge, things like that, it will come up on your social media platforms. If anybody just wants to look at pretty pictures, you can look at the hashtag Western Trout Challenge. We created that for this series. As well as I do want to take a quick second to thank all the folks from TU that did, in fact, help me, as well as the partners that came in to make this all possible. So Orvis Fly Fishing came in a big way and really did right. I was skeptical of having a brand coming on board, but they did a really great job of really supporting this project. And Montana Fly Company, who's recently been in the news for some big changes for them, but really supplying a lot of those stalwart. You wind up putting a lot of woolly buggers and chubby Chernobyls in trees, and so casting dry droppers into the wind, and the howling wind on the plains in Yellowstone National Park, you can get tangled pretty quickly. So I appreciate those guys. And of course, the Western Native Trout Initiative for just supporting this from the get-go. And I hope all of you find value in this. And I've said this a couple of times, but it's really hard to encompass the Western Native Trout experience in any one slideshow, speech, story, phrase. But I promise you that if you get out there and you get on the road and you find yourself in the places that they live, you'll know why they're important, and you'll feel it. And I hope you struggle to describe it too, because it's that incredible. So with that, it is 7:45 on my watch, and I appreciate all of you coming in, and we will be releasing a bit more information about our meeting next week coming up. Jill, we're going to connect about extending this to the Sun Valley chapter. Thank you to all of my board members and fellow volunteers in arms here at the Ted Trueblood chapter of Trout Unlimited. I hope you all have a great night, and love you all. Talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in.